You were going to send the message. It was already written. You had read it twice, maybe 3 times, and it said exactly what you meant to say. Then something shifted, not dramatically, not with any clear reason, and you read it again. This time a word felt slightly off. The tone, perhaps. Or the length. You changed a sentence. Then changed it back. Then wondered if the whole thing was necessary at all. By the time you put the phone down, you hadn't sent anything. This is a moment most people recognize. Not because it happens rarely, but because it happens often enough to feel normal. The thought that was supposed to lead somewhere instead turned inward, circling, adjusting, questioning, until the original intention quietly disappeared beneath the weight of its own examination. Overthinking rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as confusion or panic. It arrives as thoroughness. As care. It presents itself as the reasonable choice to think a little longer, to be a little more certain before moving. And because it wears the appearance of caution, it is easy to allow. Even easy to trust. But there is a point, and it is rarely obvious when it arrives, where thinking stops serving the decision and starts replacing it. Where the mind, instead of moving towards something, begins moving around it. Reviewing what has already been reviewed. Weighing what has already been weighed. Returning to questions that were, by any reasonable measure, already answered. The strange thing about overthinking is that it feels productive while it is happening. There is a sensation of engagement, of working through something important. But the action that was supposed to follow keeps getting pushed a little further ahead. The email stays unsent. The conversation stays unstarted. The decision stays unmade. And the mind continues moving, busily, carefully, while standing completely still. It is not paralysis in the way paralysis is usually imagined. There is no obvious fear, no visible hesitation. There is only thought. More of it than the moment asked for. More of it than the situation required. Thought that arrived to help and then quietly took over, filling the space where action was supposed to be. What begins as consideration becomes occupation. And what was once a moment of reflection becomes the reason nothing moved at all. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is not a single, unified thing. It is a collection of forces, some known to us, some entirely hidden, that exist in a constant state of negotiation. The conscious mind, the part we identify as ourselves, is only one voice in a much larger conversation. And beneath it, in what Jung called the unconscious, other forces move quietly, shaping behavior in ways the conscious mind rarely notices and rarely controls. Jung observed that the psyche tends toward what he called individuation. A lifelong process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of ourselves we have ignored, suppressed, or never fully examined. But this process is not comfortable. It requires the conscious mind to confront what it would prefer to avoid. And one of the ways the psyche resists that confrontation is by keeping itself busy. Overthinking, seen through Jung's lens, is not simply an excess of thought. It is the conscious mind in conflict with something it cannot quite name. The person who rewrites the message 5 times is not merely being careful. Something beneath the surface is resisting, a fear, an unacknowledged doubt, a part of the self that does not agree with what the conscious mind has decided to do. The thinking continues because the conflict beneath it has not been resolved. The loop persists because the deeper tension persists. Jung would recognize the pattern immediately. The mind circles not because the question is genuinely unanswered, but because something in the unconscious keeps pulling the question back open. The shadow, that part of the self that carries what we do not wish to see, often works precisely this way. It cannot speak directly, so it disrupts. It introduces uncertainty where certainty existed. It returns the mind to ground it has already covered, not out of thoroughness, but out of unresolved inner conflict. What looks like careful thinking from the outside is, in Jung's framework, often a psyche at war with itself. The conscious mind wants to act. Something deeper is not ready, or not willing, or not convinced. And rather than that tension surfacing clearly, as a recognizable fear, as an honest hesitation, it expresses itself as thought. More thought. Endless, circling, effortful thought that goes nowhere because it was never really about the decision in front of the person. It was about the division within them. Friedrich Nietzsche was fascinated by the weight people carry inside themselves. Not the weight of the world, or of other people, but the weight they build on their own, out of standards, expectations, and ideas about who they should be, and what they should be capable of. He noticed that people are often their own harshest judges. And that this inner judge, once established, rarely stays quiet. Nietzsche wrote about the will, the drive to act, to create, to move forward. But he also understood what happens when that drive turns inward and becomes a demand. When the person stops asking what do I want to do, and starts asking what should someone like me be able to do without hesitation. That shift, small as it sounds, changes everything. Because now the simple act of sending a message, making a decision, or taking a step becomes a test. And tests can be failed. This is where overthinking finds its fuel in Nietzsche's world. The thought that circles is not always looking for the right answer. Sometimes it is trying to avoid the wrong one. Trying to make sure that whatever comes next cannot be criticized, not by others, but by that inner voice that already has an idea of how things should go. The mind keeps thinking because the inner judge keeps raising the standard. One more check, one more revision, one more reason to wait just a little longer. Nietzsche would have seen this clearly. The person who cannot act is not always someone without courage. Sometimes it is someone with too sharp an image of what courage is supposed to look like. The standard becomes so high that any real, imperfect action feels like it falls short before it even begins. And so the mind stays busy instead. Thinking feels safer than doing, because thinking can always be revised. Action cannot. What Nietzsche pointed to was the danger of turning your own values against yourself. The same drive that pushes a person to care, to try, to want to do things well, that same drive, turned inward without balance, becomes the voice that says not yet. Not good enough. Think again. And the person listens. Because it sounds so reasonable. Because it sounds like their own voice. Because it is. William James believed that thought and action are meant to move together. That the mind, at its healthiest, thinks in order to do something, to solve, to decide, to move forward. Thinking that leads nowhere, that circles back on itself without ever landing, was for James a sign that something in that natural relationship had broken down. The mind had stopped being a tool and started being an obstacle. James was a practical man in the deepest sense of the word. He believed that an idea only becomes real when it connects to life, when it changes something, moves something, produces something. A thought that stays inside, that never reaches the world in any form, was for him a kind of waste. Not a moral failure, but a quiet loss. The energy that was supposed to carry a person forward had been spent on the journey between thinking and acting, and never arrived. What he observed was that the longer a person delays action, the harder action becomes. Not because the task grows more difficult, but because the mind grows more invested in the thinking itself. The loop becomes familiar. It starts to feel like progress. And the moment of actually doing something begins to feel strange, exposed, almost risky, because it means leaving the safety of the thought and entering the uncertainty of the real. James would have recognized the person staring at an unsent message and understood exactly what was happening. The mind had found a kind of comfort in its own activity. The thinking had become the destination rather than the path. And the action, the simple, ordinary action that started the whole process, had been quietly replaced by the feeling of working toward it. He would not have judged that person. But he would have said something simple and uncomfortable. That at some point, the thought has done everything it can do. That more thinking will not make the moment safer or the decision more certain. That the only thing left, when the mind has circled long enough, is to act, imperfectly, uncertainly, without any guarantee, and let the doing finish what the thinking never could. The mind is built to move. When it stops moving forward and starts moving in circles, it is no longer serving the person. It has quietly become the problem.